Before Loki, before Thor, before Odin, before all the Norse gods, there was only ice and fire.
A song of ice and fire.
Best season ever!
And because even ice and fire need some loving from time to time, fire eventually melted ice's icy heart, because fire was smooth with it. And from the melted ice droplets, the first being was born. A giant bigger than anything you could imagine, so big that it was simply huge.
It's bigger than that, Chris. It's large.
That giant was Ymir, and Ymir was all alone, living in the nothingness that existed between ice and fire, until a giant cow was born. What, you didn't expect a giant cow out of nowhere? This cow was Audumla, and this cow equaled Ymir in size, and its milk provided food and drink for Ymir, while the cow itself licked the ice and liquid from frozen rocks, and from those licks it created the first god, Buri. Even the cow knew that everything starts with a good licking. So the first three beings were born, and above the heat of the eternal fire, Ymir was sweating, and his sweat created another three beings, the Jötnar. And yes, the mythological texts say sweat the beings were born out of, but we all know it wasn't really sweat. It was a bee and a flower, who, since they came from a giant, we still call giants to this day. Although they're not more or less giant than Buri, the first god, but we had Ymir, a cow, a god, and three giants. Sounds like the beginning of a walked into a bar joke, but it was actually the beginning of Norse mythology. And if you've been waiting for Odin to make an appearance, he enters the story right now. Buri, the first god, had a son with one of Ymir's daughters called Bor, and Bor in turn got freaky with another giantess and had three sons of his own. Those sons were Odin and his brothers Vili and Ve. But think of Vili and Ve as like the other members of Destiny's Child. Background noise. Irrelevant. Replaceable. Forgettable. Despite the fact that the three brothers were half god, half giant, they decided that they were gods. And because identity was already something to get fanatical about back then, Odin and his bros decided to commit the cosmos' first genocide. To be fair, it was only like a handful of beings at the time. They started with Ymir and literally gutted my man. And my man was so giant that his blood created the first oceans and drowned every other being, including Odin's parents, granddad, everyone. And so the three brothers did not just commit the world's first genocide, they also committed the world's first patricide and matricide and grandfather's side. Then Odin and his brothers decided that it was time to start a new class, because right after committing the first genocide seems like the best time to invent classism. So they made one of the realms their home, called it Asgard, and called themselves the Aesir gods. Yes, Asgardians is only a name used by Marvel and by dirty movies, like the one I rented the other night. No, think about it, take a moment, give it like a hyphen or a space, and you'll see it's not just a dirty joke, it's complex. The Aesir distinction was important because the Aesir gods believed themselves superior to all other beings that follow, including the Vanir gods, which I'll do a video of another time. But at the time, there was only the Aesir and Asgards and the evil they created. Because two grandsons of Ymir survived, two giants survived the genocide, and they fled to Jotunheim and made it their home, where they became better known as the Jötnar, the enemies of the gods. Everyone came from a giant, but now the classes were set, the distinctions were clear. Aesir and Vanir gods, the Jötnar, the giants, and soon dwarves, elves, and humans. Odin, you know him as the All-Father, the mightiest of all the Norse gods. But I know him as a dude who hung himself from a tree and plucked out his own eye, all to get smarter and avoid a future where he's eaten by Loki's son, a giant wolf. Yeah, it will all make sense in a minute. Let's start in the beginning of Norse mythology, when there was just chaos. Above and below the chaos was eternal ice and fire, and eventually the two merged in the chaos to form the giant Ymir and a cow, Audumla. From Ymir's sweat, more giants were born, and the cow licked an icy rock into the shape of the first god, Buri. Buri thought that there must be a better way to have children than sweating and licking rocks, so he got sweaty with a giantess and licked her rocks, and from that, Odin and his two brothers were born, who then killed Ymir, and his blood caused a flood that drowned all other giants, including Odin's mom, and Odin and his brothers then used Ymir's corpse to form the 9 realms. long sentence for backstory, but you can see why the giants kind of held a grudge against Odin afterwards, yeah? The only two remaining giants fled to Jotunheim and repopulated it with a lot of sweating and rock licking. The giants became better known as Jötnar, or Jötun, singular, and weren't necessarily giant beings. They often looked human-like and were the forever enemies of the gods in Asgard. Odin, meanwhile, ruled over all the realms from his throne in Asgard with his all-seeing eyes. He married Frigg and allowed the giant, a Jötun, to live on Asgard as a god he became blood brothers with for reasons unknown and literally lost 2 times in all texts, but a blood brother who Odin swore would always have a place at his side. That blood brother was Loki, who would later cause the death of Odin's sons, while his own son would cause the death of Odin himself, but Odin didn't know that yet, because apparently he wasn't all that all-seeing. Odin couldn't see fate itself yet. That only came way later, when he hung himself from the life tree Yggdrasil for 9 days and 9 nights until he understood the magical runes of fate carved into it, which then gave him the ability to see the fate of the cosmos. And now Odin was able to see the end, Ragnarok, which ended with him being devoured by a wolf. Odin figured out that that wolf was Fenrir, Loki's son, so he dealt with and went on a mission. Odin wanted to fight fate itself and prevent Ragnarok, but for that, he needed more wisdom. So Odin wandered the world in search of knowledge and just to learn. He even had 2 ravens that would fly anywhere and see anything he couldn't see and learn things he couldn't learn, because Odin was full of questions seeking answers. That's why Odin is called the Wanderer and depicted as a wanderer. That was his disguise while on Earth. Odin devoted his life to seeking the wisdom to stop Ragnarok and save everyone, even if it meant learning from his enemies. So he sought out Mimir, the wisest of all the Jötnar, who drinks from a well of wisdom at the foot of Yggdrasil every morning. Odin wanted a drink to become wise, but Mimir demanded one of Odin's all-seeing eyes as a sacrifice. That rhymed.
Because I spit hot fire.
Odin ripped his eye out on the spot, drank, and became the wisest being in the cosmos, which ultimately led him to learn that fate is inevitable. Ragnarok was bound to happen, and it would be signaled by the death of his favorite son. Not Thor. I know some of y'all into the story right now, watching like, Thor, no. But no, Thor dies during Ragnarok. Odin's favorite son was Baldur, the god of light. Still, Odin was not to go down without a fight, so he collected the strongest warriors from all over the world in Valhalla, where the souls of those who died a warrior's death on earth were taken to forever fight against one another, aka the world's most epic and longest training arc. All in preparation to one day fight along the gods during Ragnarok. And then it happened. Odin's favorite son, Baldur, died through Loki's evil trickery and scheming. Odin punished his blood brother Loki by having him tied to a rock in eternal torture, but he knew he was only delaying the inevitable. Baldur's death sealed the dawn of Ragnarok, and while Loki was being tortured, he had all the time to muster up all the hatred needed to get his revenge, a plan that would see Loki leading his monstrous powerful children and an army of the Jötnar and an army of beings from hell and the army of the fire giant Surtr into Asgard to start the battle against the gods and end the cosmos. Thor, you know him as the god of thunder or the strongest avenger, but I know him as a chubby redhead with anger management issues who rides a chariot drawn by 2 goats. Seriously, on some real Santa Claus shit. Also, the real Thor is actually 3/4 giant. Yeah, you know the Jötnar, the evil giants that Thor is genociding on the regular? Yeah, he 3/4 that. Unlike in the MCU, where Loki is half Jötun, so half giant, in mythology, Thor's mom, Jörd, is a giant and also considered the personification of the earth. And Odin is half giant, hence why Thor is so strong, and maybe that genocidal hate bone against his ancestry is why the mythological Thor is always drinking or taking lives. And that was a long sentence. Marvel did actually play on that violent drunk aspect a little bit and got bits of it right, unlike the Natalie Portman part, because the actual Thor was married to Sif, and Sif actually has a lot to do with how Thor got his famous hammer. Wait, I'm talking about Mjolnir. Jeez, I'm way too immature sometimes. These jokes shouldn't be funny to me. I'm 32 years old. One day, Loki decided to cut off all of Sif's hair because it was Friday, he ain't had no job.
And you ain't got shit to do.
So after that was done, Thor was mad. And when mythological Thor gets mad, somebody usually dies. So Loki had to appease his nephew. Yeah, in Norse mythology, Loki is not Thor's brother, but actually the sworn blood brother of Odin, making him Thor's blood uncle. And in order to make up for it, Loki decided he would have a powerful weapon crafted for Thor, Mjolnir. And to do that, Loki resorted to lies and trickery because clearly he never learned his lesson. So Loki challenged the dwarven blacksmiths, basically saying, I bet you can craft the greatest weapon ever. And I like to think that the dwarves were like, hold my beer, because they're dwarves and they're always drinking beer, right? Is that just funny to me? Is that another one of those nerdy mythological jokes? I don't know. Anyway, challenge accepted, the dwarves went to work. Oh, and Loki wagered his life on the bet, by the way. So as they were crafting Mjolnir, he sabotaged it by transforming into a fly and biting one of the blacksmiths in the eye, so that Mjolnir isn't actually the greatest weapon ever. And that's why the handle of Mjolnir is short compared to its head. I swear, these dirty innuendos. I swear, I didn't even try to crack a smile. And again, 32 shouldn't be this immature. I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on in this video. If there was any doubt, Mjolnir cemented Thor as the strongest of all the Norse gods. And on top of that, Thor also had a magical belt and gloves that are often not mentioned. The gloves were necessary to handle Mjolnir's force, along with the belt that simply and literally doubled Thor's power like some video game item. And that's why Thor was able to wield Mjolnir. The whole wordy thing, that's just cool writing by Marvel. As is Thor being able to fly. In mythology, he couldn't. He was riding a chariot through the sky drawn by 2 goats. In fact, one time, one of the Jötnar, the evil giants, just took and hid Mjolnir from Thor and demanded the goddess of beauty and love in exchange, Freya. Obviously a ridiculous request, so Thor said, okay, deal. And went to get Freya, but she said, no deal. And she was slightly offended that Thor would just trade her for his hammer. So then Heimdall, the Watcher, had a genius idea. Let's dress this massive, brawny, bearded, red-headed god of thunder up in a wedding gown and present him to the giant. And they actually did that, and it worked. Because cross-dressing and bad comedy was even funny back in the ancient North. Anyway, fast forward to the wedding when the Jötnar didn't catch on to fake Freya Thor, even though he ate a whole ox and drank liters of beer while wearing the gown. Seriously? This is starting to sound like some early 2000s Adam Sandler comedy. The giants then presented fake Freya with the wedding gift, Mjolnir, and fake Freya was like, aha! Aha! I'm actually Thor. Dun, dun, dun. And then he slaughtered every giant in attendance. Like every single one. He slaughtered all of them. Again, this red-headed Thor had a temper, hence the red hair. It represented his fiery temper. There are more than a few stories of Thor being angered and responding with borderline giant genocide, because that's what this mythological Thor is all about, next to his heroics. Despite all that, and the great worship of Thor, there's an ending for the god of thunder in Norse mythology. He died during Ragnarok at the hands of Loki's son, the world serpent Jormungandr. And I'll explain in the Loki video why the dude has a son that's a serpent that can wrap around the world, and also why he has a giant wolf as a son. It's just Loki stuff. I'll explain that in this video. In the final battle of Norse mythology, Ragnarok, Thor fights Jormungandr, the world serpent, in an epic battle and defeats the giant serpent, but not without being wounded by its venomous bite. And after the battle, Thor is only able to take 9 more steps before succumbing to the poison and dying. But hey, at least we have Thursday now to remember him. You know, Thursday, Thor's Day.